Top of the day to you. This is Esther Davis. We're so happy to be a part of your day, a part of your week, and this is one exciting show, one very powerful show, because what we have today are two great thinkers in our society. They are both in Texas. Of course, Carl Sherman, the Texas State Representative, is back with us again, and that's largely by popular demand. But we also have a very special guest in Al Walker. And Al Walker is a product of Texas coming out from Morehouse College in Atlanta. And Dr. Walker is the former pastor of the historic New Hope Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. I'm going to start this conversation and say good morning to Carl Sherman, the state representative. And if you would just tell us what you're working on and what is important to you at the moment, and then I will ask Pastor Walker or Al Walker to chime in. So tell us how great you are.
Well, good morning, Esther Davis. What a privilege it is to be back with you this morning, and grateful to be with my brother, Dr. Walker, and all of the work that I know he's doing in the kingdom to advance for God's people, God's provision that he has for them. Some of the things that we are working on, and actually that I'm working on, really is a continuation of what I believe God has asked me to do, and that is, number one, working on still bringing AC to our prisons. When I first came to the house a session back, since this is my second session, discovered we had 102 prison units in the state of Texas, 145,000 souls incarcerated in our prisons. We incarcerate more people than any other state in the union. Now we have closed several units. We've got 98 prisons and 118,000 souls in our prison. Many of the individuals that we incarcerate are people of color. Many are incarcerated for crimes that they didn't do. Texas has the highest number of exonerations, and by and large, those are individuals of color. But one of the things that we also suffer with is we do not have AC in the housing units.
Wow.
And it's intentional. We've got AC in the warden's office. We've got AC in even the chaplain or the sanctuary. But we don't have AC in the housing units, and temperatures reach 130 degrees plus, according to Texas Tech research. People are dying in our prisons. And for our animal shelters, I'll tell you, as a former city manager, we are required to have AC for our animal shelters. We even have AC for our climate control storage centers, but we don't have AC for humans.
For humans in our prisons.
That's right. And I think God is going to hold us accountable. One of the other things that I'm working on is body cams. As you know, Esther Davis, being the first African-American mayor in the city of DeSoto, I was proud that our city became the first city in the nation with body cams for all of our police officers. And that was because I would get calls from African-American mothers and grandmothers telling me how their sons were mistreated. And those body cams are a game changer, but you have to have someone watching. And I would look at the different shifts for any incidents, and that's really necessary. They serve as a behavior modification tool only if there's accountability. You have to make sure that there's someone watching those videos for incidents that may have happened.
And body cams are the best way to get that done.
Absolutely. And we've got 20,000 correctional officers, and I just want to make sure that we have oversight there. We passed Botham-Jean Act, Bo's Law, HB 929, which requires now that police officers must activate their body cam at the beginning of an investigation, and they cannot deactivate it during an investigation. And this is to help create systemic accountability in law enforcement. It's best for the profession, and it's best for the public safety.
I'd like to bring in Al Walker, Pastor Al Walker. He has several titles here in the Texas area, and I know him best as the former pastor of New Hope Baptist Church. For our listeners and our viewers, that is a very historic name in our midst. New Hope Baptist Church is one of the founding churches on Maynard Jackson. Good morning, Reverend Walker. How are you?
Good morning, Ms. Davis, Esther Davis. I am doing great, and it's good to be with you and your listeners and my friend and brother Representative Sherman. So,
what's on your mind? Tell us about your new position, please.
Well, it is. It's really as a phrase out of the civil rights movement comes to mind. There's nothing more powerful than a moment whose time has come. So I sense that what I'm doing now is part and parcel of what has been my life's work in ministry for the most part. But since April, I have begun serving in a regional capacity with the Christian Church in the Southwest. I actually am now the minister of, it's a long title, Minister of Reconciliation and Anti-Racism, Community Regional Minister for Reconciliation and Anti-Racism in the Christian Church in the Southwest. Now, and what that means is it's a new position based on a new initiative in our region. The Southwest region comprises all of Texas, all of New Mexico, and the panhandle of Oklahoma. And so for now, one of the critical pieces that is in place since last year is that all of our clergy, all of clergy with standing, that means all official commissioned ministers and ordained ministers, are required to have education of 6 hours at least every 3 years in reconciliation and anti-racism training. The Christian Church is different in a number of ways, but one of those ways is that in its foundational documents, you will find that after the unrest following the assassination of Martin King in '68, the church put into place a reconciliation ministry to specifically address the vestiges of racism in this country, but beginning with the church, the admission that even in the church there are vestiges of inequity that need to be addressed. And so this is a foundational document with the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and now I represent this effort to address it from not only a social perspective, but a spiritual and theological perspective is my task to lead the region.
That is what we are most excited about. This is Esther Davis. My guest is Al Walker and the state representative, Carl Sherman Sr. And you know what's great about this breakfast broadcast is the fact that both of these gentlemen are pastors. They are leaders in their community. They are Christian men. And we talk about God on this show. We always have. Now, we want to get a little into politics because we have 3 hot topics, Carl Sherman, that we're going to have to cover in the next few minutes. So let's start with the Civil Rights Bill in Texas.
Yeah. In Texas has always had a defiant spirit, so I'm afraid I'm not encouraged by our progress in this area. As Pastor Walker mentioned, Truth and Reconciliation the important work he's doing there. I think Texas, as well as America, is having these talks and any productivity in these talks sort of aborted by this superficial discussion about critical race theory, CRT, and so that it's an area that I would hope that we would make more advancements. But it seems in our state as well as our nation, Sister Davis, we are more interested in rushing to reconciliation without truth. And that is absent from what we are trying to do by getting rid of history that is not as complementary to our state and our nation.
Reverend Walker, now
Yes.
how can we propel this? Can we work together? What are your thoughts on working together with the Carl Shermans of the world? What steps should we be taking, gentlemen, to start the conversation?
Well, one of the methods I have, apart from what's required for clergy, I am asked to meet with churches who are, I don't want to say on the cutting edge, but churches who are willing to honestly and authentically look at themselves. And so what I propose is that you have to be willing to come to the table and look into the eyes of others as you talk about in honest dialogue who you are. This past Saturday, I led a church of leaders in Fort Worth, a very large church, and actually brought up this issue of critical race theory and how it has been demonized by those who are in leadership capacities nationally, including former Vice President Pence and Ted Cruz, who changed the narrative or attempt to change the narrative of what critical race theory is. And so I actually brought this up for discussion, referencing Derek Bell, Professor Bell, who was one of the ones who actually, and this is since the 80s, this was brought up in legal academia at Harvard and then at Columbia. So this is no small undertaking, and it is not a myth, and it is not something that can be sloughed off. So I agree that we have to teach, we have to refute the notions that are myth and mythical and put the truth on the table. But I do believe, as I finished my statement here, that the way to go forward with our own people and with persons other than persons of color, whites and others, is to actually engage in earnest and honest and authentic dialogue with persons who want to go, and even persons who dissent are invited. As long as we don't become disagreeable, we don't have to agree on everything, but we have to be honest about what the truth is. So that's a beginning for me, and I concur with our brother.
Wow. Okay, Carl Sherman, the ball's in your court. Is that a big subject that can be tackled and handled or in some way brought up, at least brought up in the Texas legislature? How do we get this done?
I believe we can. I know that all things are possible. And so it is a part of coming together is the actual, I think, challenge is we have to be focused on healing the wounds of our state and our nation. And the way you do that is by means of what Dr. Walker is talking about, having truth a part of that reconciliation and not rush to reconciliation. When we had the incident, the tragedy of George Floyd, that killing that was seen in Minnesota, the nation changed. there was a repentance, a spirit of repentance across this nation. Many African American pastors can tell you they received calls from their colleagues that are lighter complexion brothers and sisters who would say to them, "What can we do? What can we do to change things?" And unfortunately, that dissipated, and it became political. And we've got to get back to the table of acknowledging and owning that this nation, this state, has a ways to go to eradicate racism. We know that all things are possible, and there are some men and women who are willing to sit down at the table and recognize and acknowledge that just because these things happen do not mean that we have to behave as though they never happened in order for us to make progress. You always have to acknowledge the past in order to move forward as a state. And I think we can do that. I think there are women and men on both sides of the aisle who are open to this, but we've got to not make it political.
I am a community host, and I hear a lot of things the same way that you two gentlemen do. But what should the communities be doing? What is most exciting, and we should be totally aware of this. Our communities are integrated. My community and a lot of the established communities in Texas have members of other cultures and races in there down the street. So I don't see it as a big problem, but it is a big problem. How do we minimize the problem? Anybody can talk about that one. We'll start with Dr. Walker.
Well, thank you. I believe, and this is my my litmus test, and I've been a product of the civil rights era, having been born in the Deep South. I learned those lessons, and I believe as we're talking, yes, we need to get persons around the table. We need work legislatively, but at the same time, we need all of our tools. So I believe there's still a need for protest. There's still a need for advocacy. And in all things move in that direction. Martin and Malcolm didn't agree on methodologies, but they were in sync on getting their people to liberation, to full citizenship. And so we need everybody, and this is a biblical term back with Nehemiah, we need everybody on the wall. We need everybody working. But in some ways, we do need to work in tandem with one another. We do need to collaborate. But this is going to take everything. We have been, I mentioned this past week, a book that I have persons reading called The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. And in it he talked about, he quotes Martin by talking about the fierce urgency of now and how it's been, more than 50 or 60 years we're fighting. And now we're fighting the retarding of the clock. We're fighting for voting rights.
Yes.
In 2021, we're fighting for equitable distribution of representation in 2021. That's unreal. But what we cannot do is lose heart. We cannot, as I've heard, we must believe it is possible. And at the core of this, an essential question I ask in my presentations is, do you believe it's possible to eliminate racism, to eradicate racism? And I believe that is a requisite. I know we must believe it's possible to really address this and move forward. But It's going to take every tool on our belt.
Carl Sherman, that's a perfect pathway into voting rights.
That's right. That's right. As Dr. Walker mentioned, there was certainly an attack on our voters' rights, an attack to remove the progress that Dr. King and others made in 1965, the sacrifices made in order for us to have these voting rights. And Shelby County versus Holder is the issue in which that verdict changed a lot of things. Those 9 states that were always under pre-clearance, and Texas was one of those 9 states, immediately moved to change voting laws. And unfortunately, my colleagues and I, we, were not successful in at least stopping that train, but we did deny a quorum in spending time in D.C. As we fought to get Congress to act. And Congress did act in passing H.R. 4, John Lewis Act, and that was progress. But unfortunately, in the Senate, we didn't see the same level of courage from 2 particular senators who held things up. This is important. I mean, you have no democracy if we do not have the freedom to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And when you couple that with stacking our courts with partisan players, then what you end up having is you can't win in the democracy as far as voting. And when you take it to the courts, it is not a guarantee that justice will prevail when you have partisan actors on the magistrate. So I think for us as citizens, we have to do everything in our power to change these things by ensuring that we come out and vote. I've looked at the data, and the data is not encouraging when you look at the number of Democrats who turn out to vote.
Mm-hmm.
They are retarding our opportunities to vote. However, we don't help ourselves either, because when you compare the contrast, Republican versus Democrat, the percentage of turnout, our number of turnout is very anemic. And in many cases, as I look at all 254 counties, we're in the low single digits in voter turnout, while Republicans are in the double digits.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to compel their voters to come out and vote, because they're voting because they want to make sure that their voices are heard. And some of our constituents are just not voting, unfortunately. And we have an opportunity. In fact, one of Dr. Walker's Morehouse colleagues, Lee Merritt, is running for Attorney General. And I'm going all over the state trying to make sure that we make history by Lee Merritt being the first African-American Attorney General. We've got to make change where we can.
Absolutely.
And when we change these positions of influence and power, we can reverse some of the draconian legislation that's passed that's only intended to minimize our voices and the voices of our children in the future.
Well, I'm so happy you said that, because we are retarding our opportunity by not voting. And I even start with my own area, my precinct, and our voting power is just nothing. It's minimal, and that is a shame. That is something we need to correct in our communities. This is why this conversation is so inspiring, and I do want to thank both of you. This is Esther Davis. I have Carl Sherman and Al Walker, Pastor Al Walker, of course, from New Hope. I can hear the people calling me now, Reverend Walker. Is this the guy from New Hope? And we are just honored that they have taken the time. We are at 8 o'clock in the morning talking about our communities. I have one final subject, gentlemen, that I have started working on. About 5 years ago, there were 200 girls kidnapped in Africa, and we thought that was appalling. and it's been just about 4 or 5 years ago. I was included in that media blisk and interviewed one of the mothers from Africa subsequently about 3 years ago here in Texas because they came to Texas. One or two of the mothers came to Texas because not all of the girls had been returned. Fast forward to the day, we have a similar situation in Dallas, Texas, in the state of Texas. We have trafficking. But my number one concern, just pinning this down, is missing black girls. Thank you so much, Carl Sherman, for your statement. We will be using that one next Monday night when we have the town hall report. But I just want a little bit of dialogue. We all have sisters and mothers and wives. Can we tolerate missing black girls?
Absolutely not. Tens of thousands of black girls and women go missing every year, and not much is reported on their lives and them being missing. We can't tolerate it, and we've got to do a better job, not just in the national media, but also among black media too. We as a community have to work closer together in the faith-based community. We've got to close in the network because we are our brother's keeper. We are our sister's keeper. And, it breaks my heart to know that black girls and black women are missing, and it's though no one is doing the Amber Alert, essentially, for these young ladies and these young women. I actually am working on legislation to at least expand the Amber Alert to include women who may be going through depression, which is not an issue right now where we include those women in the Amber Alert or men as well. I'm working with a lady in my district. Her daughter, Providence, went missing. African-American year-old, 16-year-old, who went missing. Now, we've found her. They found her, but not after a lot of trauma and abuse, and so she's going through therapy now. But thank God she was found.
Exactly.
Because many don't have that ending. So we've got to do more.
We've got to do more. Reverend Walker, just your vantage point on this subject.
Yes, I do agree, and I believe it begins with us. I'll say it begins with me and we who have dropped the ball, or rather not ever picked the ball up relative to media information concerning missing black girls, and it even goes back to the horrible state of affairs concerning black women who were stopped and or tragically killed in police stops. Even those numbers were not reported like the numbers reported for men. So
Absolutely.
I think we as a community, but we as men especially, need to speak up, pick up the mantle of responsibility regarding our families. We as men are heads of our families, and what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And so we if we're going to be community, we must be concerned about all persons, no matter who they are or what they experience. But concerning this topic, we need to drill down a bit more to get at the core of how and why it's happening, and even the slave trade that comes up through North Texas. All of it's interconnected, and the problem is oftentimes issues are more complex than they typically have been, and so we've got to rely on those who are expert, like Representative Sherman, when it comes to certain information legislation. But we've got to jump in and engage those who are in leadership, those who are responsible, but we've got to keep our hand on the pulse of this issue regarding missing black girls, missing black women, and then all others. But we've got to focus on those who have not gotten attention.
Well said. Well done. Would you believe we're past 30 minutes? It's been an inspiring conversation. I've been talking to Carl Sherman, Sr., Texas State Representative, and, of course, Pastor Al Walker. And we have had this inspiring conversation from two thinkers, and I have wanted to do this, I bet you, for 10 or 12 years. I need members of clergy speaking out on politics, on civil rights, on voting rights, on our communities. This is most important. I don't know if either one of you know, but my dad was chairman of the deacon board at Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church in Conroe, Texas for 44 years. And they used to talk about, I could hear Daddy talking to ministers about what should be done, where are the politics. And in those days, we only had probably funeral home directors and clergy and some businessmen, but they did have the conversation. It's been my utter delight, Carl Sherman and Al Walker, to have both of you in the same room at the same time. This is Esther Davis. I'll be right back with closing remarks.
Beautiful. Thank you.
God bless you.
By the way, you really are the greatest audience in the world. We'll see you next time on the Esther Davis Show. Thank you.